So the topic for today is about research ethics. This slide presentation is made and prepared by Ms. Carmel Casuga. Lesson overview. Definition of research ethics, some principles of ethical research, ethical considerations in research, and advantages and limitations of research ethics. What is research ethics? So, it provides guidelines for the responsible conduct of research. So, in addition, it educates and monitors scientists, researchers, conducting ethical standards. So, yung ethical considerations, it plays a significant role in all research studies. And all researchers, scientists must be aware of and attend to those ethical considerations related to their studies. So in research, the ends do not justify the means. And researchers must not put the need or desire to carry out a study above the responsibility to maintain a well-being of the study participants. So, dapat ang research hindi siya bias, di ba? Hindi pinipuwersa yung mga participants. Hindi pwedeng yung gusto lang ni researcher ang masusunod without caring about the well-being of those participants. So, research studies are built on trust between the participants and the researchers. And the manner of researching should also be trustworthy and responsible. But, as I have mentioned, that responsibility just not fall to the researcher. Dapat trustworthy and responsible din si participant. Dapat totoo ang kanyang mga responses. Diba? Hindi dinaya. So the two overriding rules of ethics are the participants should not harm that the participants should not be harmed in any way during the conduct of the study, physically, mentally, socially, or emotionally, and that researchers obtain the participants' informed consent, diba? Before conducting the study, kailangan magpaalam muna sila kay kay participant, and the participant will voluntarily na mag-i-accept, diba? Maging willing sila to be a participant of the study. So, to remind researchers of their responsibilities, professional organizations have developed codes of ethical conduct for their members. So, the similarity among the ethical codes is not coincidental. So, they are based in the same history. So, in 1974, the U.S. Congress passed the National Research Act of 1974, which authorized the creation of the National Commission for the Protein of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. This commission, was charged with developing an ethical code and guidelines for researchers. So the need for a standard set of guidelines was prompted by a number of studies in which researchers lied to research participants or put them in harm's way to carry out their studies. So, for example, in the study on the effects of group pressure conducted in 1960s, researchers lied to the participants, 'di ba? Nagsinungaling yung mga researchers dun sa participants, telling them na to apply high levels of electric shock to another person who was apparently in agony, although no shock was really applied and the unseen person was simply pretending. 'Di ba? So, ulitin ko, nagsinungaling in a study, di ba? Nagsinungaling itong mga researchers. Then, sabi that the participant will be electrically shocked. But yung nakita nilang ina-electric shock ay hindi talaga siya nakukuryente. So, nagpretend lang yung participant na nakukuryente siya. Then, sinabi sa research, ay ganito yung output kapag nakuryente ang isang tao. Hindi naman pala, kasi nagsinungaling sila doon. So, yun. So, in another study marami pang study lasting for decades using that method. So, mostly ginagamit yan sa biomedical researches. But, today, the studies such as this would not be federally funded. Okay. And could not be conducted at universities, research institutes, and medical centers that adhere to the current ethical guidelines. So, mostly talaga ng mga research centers nowadays must follow, diba, the ethical guidelines. So, most hospitals, colleges, and universities have a review group, usually called the Human Subjects Review Committee or the Institutional Review Board. So, this board should consist of at least 5 members, not all of one gender, include one non-scientist, and include at least one member who is mainly concerned with the welfare of the participants. Okay. So, when conducting a study, for example, sa vaccine, di ba? May mga finalo muna silang protocols, mga guidelines, before nakapag-trial sa tao. And ang approval board nun ay napakarami. Di ba? Almost the whole world are part of the approving body. Kung dadalhin ba sa isang bansa ang vaccine. Kung papayagan na ba ito mag-trial. Okay. And that representative is the WHO. And sa WHO, maraming committees under them that checks the ethical considerations that should be followed by the researchers. So, people, diba, who may have a conflict of interest in that study, should be included. So, typically, a researcher must submit a proposal to the chair of the board who distributed copies to all members. So, individually, the members evaluate the proposed treatment of participants and then meet as a group to discuss their evaluations. So, if any questions, diba, arises as to whether the participants may be harmed, diba, doon nila kinaklarify yung study. Doon nila nire-review, rigorous review yung ginagawa nila. Bago nila i-approve yung study. Kasi kailangan nila ma-check if the participants, diba, will be at risk during the conduct of the experiment or after, diba, yung side effects ng experiment. So, based doon, kailangan man minimize, diba, ng review board yung mga effects, diba, or mga possible risks or threats na pwedeng mangyari sa participants. So, basic principles of ethical research. So, we have 7. First is respect for autonomy. Next, beneficence and non-maleficence. Justice, informed consent, confidentiality and data protection, integrity, and lastly, conflict of interests. So, an autonomous person is capable of deliberation about personal goals and acting under the direction of such deliberation. So, to respect autonomy is to give weight to autonomous persons' considered opinions and choices while retaining from obstructing their actions unless they are clearly detrimental to others. So, kailangan that the participants is voluntarily and willingly to participate in the study. So, we must respect their opinions, their choices, di ba? Hindi natin sila pwedeng puwersahin. And their actions will be their responsibility. But if we include them to the study, then what will happen to them is our responsibility. Pero kung ano man mangyari sa kanila, hindi na natin mababago yun after. Kaya kailangan voluntary ang pagpa-participate dito. So, yun. Pwede mo silang tanggalin, i-refrain, di ba? Or sa study, if they are really, di ba, obstructing the study, kung nakakagulo sila, pwede mo silang tanggalin doon. So, by contrast, when a potential research participant may lack capacity to make autonomous decisions, respect for persons requires that they be protected against harm. So, if they are not capable of choices, diba, of decisions, such as being a participant of a study, so you must respect the other people, diba, na concerned sa kanya, specifically guardians. Ngayon na nga lang, for example, in vaccination, diba, the vaccination is still in the trial mode pa rin, especially sa mga bata. So, dahil yung mga bata ay lacking of the capabilities to decide for themselves in this kind of matters, diba, the decision of the guardians or the parents must be respected. So, yun. Kaya hindi natin sila pwedeng pilitin kung ayaw ng guardians. So, the capacity of self-determination matures during an individual's life, and some individuals lose this capacity wholly in part because of illness, mental disability, or circumstances that severely restrict liberty. So, there is still this another case na kapag yung participant naman ay may pinagdadaanan, could be physical, mental, emotional, social, diba, disabilities, and doon nare-restrict yung kalayaan nila, then we must also respect their guardians' opinions or decisions. So, yun. So, respect for the immature and the incapacitated may require protecting them as they mature or while they are incapacitated. So, some persons are in need of extensive protection, even to the point of excluding them from the research that has a risk of harm. Next is beneficence and non-maleficence. So, the need for favorable risk-benefit assessment requires an assessment of the probabilities of both the harms and of the benefits may arise. So, kailangan kinukonsider natin yung possible threats and the benefits na pwedeng mag-arise during and after the conduct of the study. So, the term risk is generally used for harms or threats, but the probability of benefits also needs to be considered. So, many kinds of possible harms and benefits need to be taken into account. So, depende sa study. Yung risks na pwede. It could be in the form of mental, diba? Social, emotional, or physical, diba? Harm. Depende sa methodology ng study. So, these are, diba? Examples na ibibigay ko sa inyo. So, for example, risk of psychological harm. Physical harm, legal harm, social harm, and economic harm, and corresponding benefits. So, yan. Yung mga examples ng harms. So, while the most likely types of harms of research participants are those of psychological or physical pain or injury, there may be others caused of social nature to consider. So, discovering what will in fact provide a benefit may require exposing persons to some risks. So, conducting research without any risk of causing harm would prevent many improvements in human welfare. Pero imposible nga yun. Lahat nga naman kasi talaga ng experiments and trials ay may possible risks. So, imposibleng walang risks doon. Kung walang risks yung mga experiments natin, di sana matagal ng progressive yung human welfare. But that is ideal. So, where the participants may benefit directly through the research, such risks are more justifiable. If you benefit from it, the risks are justifiable. However, where the research project will not benefit the participants directly, the wider benefits to others in terms of potential to alleviate disease or other harms in the future may be justified research with some risks, but only after the very careful evaluation. So next is justice. So an injustice occurs when some benefit to which a person is entitled is denied to them without good reason, or when some burden is imposed unduly on them. So nangyayari lang to injustices kapag dininay sila sa benefits na dapat nilang matanggap. 'Di ba? Or naging burden yung study na yun para sa kanila and hindi sila nabigyan ng magandang explanation at kabayaran on that. And that is injustice. So researchers need to give careful considerations to the overall societal impact of the research, both in the selection of the participants and the benefits and burdens arising from it. So, next is informed consent. So the information should include the research procedure, the purposes, the risks, and anticipated benefits, alternative procedures, and a statement offering the participants the opportunity to ask questions and to withdraw at any time from the research. So during this consent, kailangan mong is describe lahat ng yun, di ba? And bigyan mo sila ng pagkakataon na magtanong on all of those, di ba? The purposes, the risks, yung methodology, yung mga procedures, di ba? Lahat yun, bigyan mo sila ng pagkakataon na malaman nila in detail. And kung gusto nila mag-withdraw, then mag-withdraw sila. So, hindi mo sila pwedeng pigilan. So, if a person is not receiving a treatment, diba, but is a pure volunteer, the standard of disclosure may be expected to be higher. So, the extent and nature of information should be such that persons, knowing that the procedure is neither necessarily for their care nor perhaps fully understood, can decide whether they wish to participate in the furthering of knowledge. So even when some direct benefit to them is anticipated, so the participants should understand clearly the range of risks and the voluntary nature of participation. Yon. So next is confidentiality and data protection. So alam naman na natin to. So when designing a research project, so researchers should consider whether the personal data to be studied, diba? In, included with their interviews, with their responses, should be protected, should be private. Hindi yun dapat lalabas. It should be treated with utmost confidentiality. Hindi mo yun pwede pakita kung kani-kanino, i-chismis kung kani-kanino. Diba? Kung ano yung nakita mo sa data niya. Lahat yun private at purely for the study, not for bias purposes. So, then the process of securing informed consent will entail respect to the participants themselves. So there are a range of options for the type of consent participants can give to the use of their data. So pwede silang magbigay ng options kung hanggang saan lang yung pwede mong paggamitan ng data nila. And kapag lumagpas ka doon, then siguro may repercussions after. Diba? Kung for the study purposes lang, then for the study purposes lang. Huwag mo na ipasa kung saan-saan. Diba? Hindi yung, halimbawa, binigay nga sa'yo yung data mo. Ay, binigay sa'yo as a researcher yung data nila bilang participants. So, kung para sa research lang yun, huwag mo gamitin with other purposes. Outside the research. So, yun yung sinasabi, confidentiality and data protection. And dapat full anonymity. Kumbaga, hindi mababanggit yung personality nila, kung sino sila. Based, or yung pangalan nila, based from those data. Next is integrity. So, the research should be designed, reviewed, and undertaken to ensure recognized standards of integrity are met and quality and transparency are assured. So examples of unacceptable practices. So it includes fabrication by the creation of false data. Yan. Minsan kapag thesis ng undergraduate nangyayari yan dahil wala na makuhang participants or kulang ng budget sa pagpapaprint ng instrument. Diba? Para lang ma-met nila yung number of participants nila, yung researchers na yung sumasagot. Diba? Dinadaya na nila. O minsan naman, pag hindi umakma sa kanila yung result. Diba? For example, sa action research, hindi umakma yung result. Ibig sabihin, parang lumabas na hindi daw effective yung research. So, babaguhin ni researcher yung data niya para lumabas na effective yung intervention. So yun, there's no integrity behind that. The falsifications of data are and inappropriate manipulation of data, diba? Plagiarism and misappropriation use of others' ideas, the misappropriation of others' intellectual properties, and not acknowledging the others, the owners of their ideas, diba, are against to ethics. So it is a form of misconduct to the researchers and very improper behavior. So conflict of interest. So the independence of research should be clear And any conflicts of interest or partially should be explicit. So, kailangan walang bias between the researchers and the participants and the results of the data. So, hindi dapat yun baguhin according to the personal gain of those people. Dapat may truth and integrity yung study. So, a conflict of interest arises where a researcher's obligation to the institution or a funder to conduct research independently is likely to be compromised or appear to be compromised. So, this can be because they may obtain a personal gain or gain to a member of their family or another person to whom they have close personal relationship arising from the research. This gain may be financial, diba? Or otherwise have commitments and obligations to another person or body that may appear to act as a potential influence over the independent conduct of the research. So, pwedeng may appearance ng conflict of interest kahit na wala namang conflict na talagang nag-exist. So, researchers must disclose anything, diba, that may be perceived by others as a potential conflict of interest. So, ethical considerations in research. Ethics should be a primary consideration and it should be at the forefront of the researcher's agenda. So, of all the steps in the research process, it does tend to relate closely to the data collection and reporting and distribution of reports than any of the other phase of the research. So, doon talaga sa phase na yon nagmamanifest yung ethical considerations, diba? Sa data collection at sa data discussion. So, in all steps of the research process, you need to engage in ethical practices. So, practicing ethics ay komplikado, complex yun, at ini-involve nun yung set of maraming guidelines, diba? Set of ethical guidelines, such as those from professional commissions, professional associations, diba? The research institutes, yan. The institutional review boards, yan, yung mga guidelines na dapat kinukonsider yan lahat. Diba? Kaya napaka-complex ng pag-consider ng ethics in the research. So, ethical considerations in data reporting. Data should be reported honestly without changing or altering the findings, di ba, to satisfy the certain predictions or interested groups. Paulit-ulit na sinasabi, wag i-falsify yung data para lang umayon sa'yo yung study. So, studies completed by others should not be plagiarized. Wag mong kopyahin in toto. Wag mong kopyahin na verbatim na yung parang buong literature mo nanggaling lang sa isang research. Kopyang-kopya. Wala ka man lang. So, dapat doon, gist lang yung kinukuha natin. Diba? Hindi siya copy-pasted. And dapat, ibigay natin yung due, diba, at proper acknowledgement dun sa may-ari nung idea na yun. And research should be free of jargon and be understandable to those being studied. Dapat yung research natin ay naiintindihan ng participants, hindi dapat malabo sa kanila yung nilalaman ng study natin. And the result should be published. So, lahat dapat ng research, especially kapag kumuha ka ng data sa mga tao, dapat lahat ng research ay i-publish at i-disseminate kung ano yung naging resulta. Okay, wag yan itago sa cabinet. Kailangan i-report yan. Diba? So, these are the advantages of research ethics. So, these are self-explanation only. So, research ethics promotes the aims of the research. So, it increases trust among the researcher and the respondent. It is important to adhere to ethical principles in order to protect the dignity, rights, and welfare of the research participants. So researchers can be held accountable and answerable for their actions. So ethics promotes social and moral values. So promotes the ambitions of research as understanding, veracity, and dodging of error. So ethical standards uphold the values that are vital to cooperative work such as belief, answerability, mutual respect, and impartiality. And lastly, ethical norms in research also aid to construct public upkeep for research. So people are more likely to trust a research project if they can trust the worth and reliability of the research. And lastly, the limitations of research ethics. So, possibilities to physical integrity containing those linked with experimental drugs and dealings with other involvements that will be used in the study. Okay, kailangan nire-respect natin yung pangangatawan, di ba? The physical aspects of the participants. Na hindi sila dapat masasaktan or malalagay sa alanganin, 'di ba? Or magkakaroon ng injury during the conduct of the study and after the study. So mostly ma-manifest yung ganito sa experimental researches. For example, yung pagturok ng experimental drugs like the vaccine for example o yung pag-improve ng gamot, 'di ba? Kasama yun doon. So, psychological risks, for example, a questionnaire may perhaps signify a risk if it fears traumatic events or happenings that are especially traumatic. There are times kasi that during the interviews, di ba, pwedeng magkaroon ng psychological risk dun sa participant if you cross the line and interviewed them, watch you want to interview them and not considering their history. And kapag hindi mo na control yung situation, pwede silang maapektuhan or ma-influence negatively. Next is social, legal, and economic risks. For example, if personal information collected during a study and unintentionally released, di ba? Participants might face a threat of judgment and stigmatization. So, for example, may research ka about what? For example, about politics. And sa politics na yun, ay parang may pinapaboran siyang isang side. Then, nakabasa ng iba. Diba? Na hindi pabor sa idea niya of and philosophy niya of politics. So, pwede siyang mabully, pwede siyang ma-discriminate, di ba? Ng ibang tao. And it might affect his social, di ba? Social aspects, social health, di ba? And maraming risks yun sa taong yun. Next, certain tribal or inhabitant groups may possibly suffer from discrimination or stigmatizations, burdens because of research. So typically, if associates of those groups are recognized as having a greater than usual risk of developing a specific disease. So kaya when conducting a research to these tribal groups, dumadaan mo na in numerous process and maraming nag-a-approve, di ba? At nagre-review yung study proposal. So, in Philippines, NCIP, ang isa sa mga nagre-review ng proposals, the National Commissions for Indigenous People, when we are conducting involving indigenous people. Kasi pwedeng maging subject sila at risks, diba? Because of your findings, diba? Or pwede sila maapektuhan sa health. So, any questions? I assure na malinaw sana yung ating discussions about ethical considerations, and sana ma-apply ito during the conduct of your research. So these are the references of the study.